All right, let's dive into something kind of interesting today. We're going to be talking about the Bank of England, what they're doing, and maybe more importantly, what they might be doing next year with interest rates in 2025.
Yeah, it's like the Bank of England is trying to send us a message, but it's like written in a different language or something. It's not quite clear what they're trying to tell us. The markets are saying one thing, but the bank might be thinking something else.
Yeah, and the thing is, they just decided to keep the bank rate right where it is at 4.75%. And, at first glance, you might think, oh, well, that's not very exciting, is it?
Hmm.
But the markets were actually expecting maybe like 2 rate cuts next year. And then the Bank of England governor, Andrew Bailey, kind of threw everyone a curveball. He came out and said that maybe 4 quarter-point cuts in 2025 might be more appropriate. It's like, well, hold on a second. What's going on here?
Oh, right. Yeah, it seems like everyone's on a different page. And then to make things even more interesting, it looks like three members of the Monetary Policy Committee actually voted against keeping the rates the same. They actually wanted to cut rates right now.
3 of them, huh? So who are these three and what's their deal?
Well, you got Dingra, Ramsden, and Taylor. Ramsden has been pretty vocal for a while now, saying that he wants to cut rates. He thinks the economy needs a little help and that cutting rates is the way to do it. Dingra is more worried about how high inflation is hurting people, especially those who don't have a lot of money. She thinks that cutting rates could give some people a break. And Taylor, well, he's got a slightly different angle. He's more focused on the possibility that the economy might slow down, and he sees cutting rates as a way to kind of give things a little push and keep things moving. But the fact that all three of them disagreed with the decision to keep rates steady, well, that tells you that there's some real debate going on inside the MPC about what the best move is.
Okay, so it's like got this kind of internal battle going on at the Bank of England. You got the folks who are saying, hey, let's be careful and take it slow. And then you got others who are saying, no, we need to do something now. And it kind of makes you wonder who's got the right idea. Are they being too cautious, or are the ones who want to cut rates jumping the gun?
That's a great question. And to try and answer that, the article we're looking at brings in a few experts. They try to weigh in on this whole debate, like Stefan Koopman from Rabobank. He thinks the markets are totally off base. He thinks the MPC is actually getting ready to cut rates way faster than anyone is expecting.
So he's on the side of let's cut them faster, huh?
Exactly. And he's not the only one. Konstantinos Venetis from TS Lombard seems to agree with him. He's even using phrases like deeper rate cutting cycle, which makes you think that maybe this is going to be a bigger change than we thought at first.
Okay, so faster and deeper cuts. Got it.
Yes, yeah.
But here's the thing I'm wondering about. When are these cuts going to happen? Are we talking about a big sudden change or more of a gradual thing?
Yeah, that's where it gets even more interesting. Sanjay Raja, he's a UK economist at Deutsche Bank. Well, he's also predicting 4 cuts next year, but he thinks they'll mostly happen in the second half of the year, kind of like waiting till the end to make the big move.
So a backloaded approach. That's like waiting for the perfect moment, right?
Hmm.
But why wait?
Well, he thinks the Bank of England is playing it smart. Like they're saying, let's just see how things go and then we'll make a move. They're waiting for certain signs from the economy before they really start cutting rates.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are these signs that they're looking for? What's going to tell them that it's time to start chopping those rates?
Well, Raja specifically mentions things like unemployment going up over 4 or 5%, and wage settlements cooling down, meaning that wages aren't growing as fast anymore. And services inflation coming down, too. It's almost like they have this checklist, and once they check off all the boxes, then they'll feel good about cutting rates faster.
So it sounds like a slow start to the year, and then maybe things pick up speed in the second half. But it's not just about the timing, is it? It feels like they're trying to do two things at once. They want to help the economy grow, but they also don't want to mess things up. It's kind of like they're walking a tightrope.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tough balancing act, for sure. On one hand, they want to loosen things up a bit and give the economy a little boost, but they're also worried about spooking the markets or accidentally causing problems. It's like trying to steer a giant ship. You can't just make sudden turns. You got to be careful and make changes gradually.
It's funny you should say that because I was just thinking about how this affects us. Regular people just trying to manage their money. I mean, we're not the ones setting interest rates. But all these decisions from the Bank of England can have a real impact on us, like our mortgages, our investments, all that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why it's so important to understand what these potential rate cuts could mean for you and your finances.
Okay, so let's get practical here. If the Bank of England does decide to speed things up in the second half of 2025, what could happen? What should we be watching out for?
Well, one thing that could see some big changes is the housing market. Lower interest rates usually make mortgages easier to afford, and that can lead to more people wanting to buy houses, which could push prices up. So if you're thinking about buying a home, these rate cuts could be a big deal.
But hold on, wouldn't that also mean that housing could become even less affordable for some people? Like the ones who are already having trouble getting into the market. Wouldn't that just make the gap between homeowners and renters even bigger?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's kind of a two-sided coin.
It could help some people get into the market, but it could also make things harder for others.
And we might even see people start buying houses just to try and make money quickly, which could create a bubble that eventually bursts. Definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay, so good news for some buyers, maybe not so good for others. Sounds like a mixed bag for the housing market. What about investments? How could these rate cuts affect things like stocks and bonds?
Well, historically, when interest rates go down, stocks tend to look more appealing to investors. That's because when rates are low, investors start looking for other places to get higher returns, and the stock market often seems like a good option. So we might see certain sectors do really well after these cuts, especially the ones that are sensitive to changes in interest rates.
So does that mean people should start moving their investments around?
Well, it's not quite that simple. Remember, investing always has risks. And we got to keep in mind that the Bank of England is making these decisions based on what they think is best for the UK economy. But that's just one part of the whole picture. Things happening around the world, unexpected events, all sorts of stuff can throw things off.
Right, it's like trying to predict the weather. You can look at the forecast, but you never know when a storm might pop up.
Exactly. So, yeah, while these potential rate cuts might create some good opportunities, it's super important to stay informed, do your research, and understand the risks. Don't just jump into anything without thinking it through just because you hear interest rates might be going down.
So stay alert, do your homework, and don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Got it.
But sometimes I think we get so caught up in all the numbers and predictions that we forget about the people involved. These economic decisions have real impacts on people's lives, on their hopes, their worries, their ability to just make ends meet.
You're absolutely right. And that's what makes this whole discussion so interesting and honestly a little bit scary, too. We're talking about real people's livelihoods here.
I mean, imagine you're a young couple trying to save up for down payment on your first house. These rate cuts could be amazing, or they could be a total disaster. It all depends on how the market reacts. Or think about someone who's close to retirement and counting on their investments to give them a steady income. These changes could have a huge impact on their financial security.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It reminds us that this isn't just about abstract economic ideas. These decisions have real consequences for people and families all over the UK.
Exactly. So as we're trying to figure out this whole economic situation, it's important to remember that there are real people behind all these numbers. Their stories, their hopes, their struggles, they're all connected to these economic forces. And even though we can't predict the future for sure, we can at least try to understand what might happen because of these decisions, and then make smart choices that work for us and our goals.
It's kind of like trying to walk that fine line, you know? Keep everyone happy but not make any sudden moves.
Yeah, it makes you think about how all of this connects back to us. Regular folks trying to manage our own money. We're not setting interest rates or anything. But these decisions from the Bank of England, they can really affect us. Everything from our mortgages to our investments.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important to try and understand what these potential rate cuts could actually mean for your own personal finances.
Okay, so let's get down to it. If the Bank of England does decide to speed things up with those cuts later in 2025, what could happen? What should we be looking out for?
Well, one area that could see a lot of action is the housing market. Usually when interest rates go down, mortgages get a little easier to afford. And that can lead to more people wanting to buy houses, which could push prices up. So if you're thinking about buying a home, these rate cuts could be pretty important.
But wait a minute, wouldn't that also mean that housing could actually become less affordable for some people? Especially those who are already struggling to get into the market. Wouldn't it just make that gap between homeowners and renters even wider?
Yeah, that's a valid point. It's kind of a double-edged sword, you know? Lower rates could help some folks get into the market, but it could also make it even tougher for others. And we could even see people start buying up houses just to try and make a quick profit. That could create a bubble, and we all know what happens when bubbles burst. Definitely something to pay attention to.
Okay, so good news for some buyers, maybe not so good for others. Kind of sounds like the housing market could be a bit of a roller coaster. Now, what about investments? How could these rate cuts affect things like stocks and bonds?
Well, historically, when interest rates go down, stocks tend to become more attractive. Investors start looking for places to get better returns, and the stock market often seems like a good bet. So we might see certain sectors do particularly well after these cuts, especially the ones that are really sensitive to changes in interest rates.
So is this a sign that people should be thinking about changing their investments?
Well, hold on a sec. It's not that simple. Gotta remember that investing always comes with some risk, and the Bank of England is making these decisions based on their view of the UK economy. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. There are things happening all over the world. Unexpected events could pop up and throw things off.
Right, it's like trying to predict the weather. You can check the forecast, but you never really know when a storm might roll in.
Exactly. So while these rate cuts could create some good opportunities, it's really important to stay informed. Do your research and understand the risks involved. Don't just jump into anything without thinking it through, just because you hear that interest rates might be going down.
Okay, so stay informed, do your homework, and don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Huh.
Got it. But sometimes I feel like we get so focused on all the numbers and forecasts that we forget about the human side of things. These economic decisions have real consequences for people on their hopes, their anxieties, their ability to simply get by.
You're absolutely right. It's what makes this whole topic so fascinating and honestly a little bit unnerving too. We're talking about people's lives here.
I mean, imagine you're a young couple trying to save up enough money for a down payment on a house. These rate cuts could be a huge help, or they could really throw a wrench in your plans. It all depends on how the market reacts. Or think about someone getting close to retirement relying on their investments to provide a steady income. These changes could have a big impact on their financial security.
That's such an important point. It reminds us that these aren't just abstract economic theories. These decisions have tangible consequences for real people and families all across the UK.
Absolutely. So as we try to make sense of this complex economic situation, it's crucial to remember that there are real people behind all the numbers. Their stories, their hopes, their struggles, they're all interwoven with these economic forces. And while we can't predict the future with absolute certainty, we can at least try to understand the potential consequences of these decisions and make informed choices that align with our own values and goals.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? It's like we've got this puzzle with all these moving parts. The Bank of England's trying to find that sweet spot between boosting the economy and keeping things stable. Experts are making predictions that could send the housing market through the roof or leave some buyers high and dry. And then there's all of us just trying to figure out how to manage our money with all this uncertainty going on.
It's definitely a complex situation, but that's why we're here, right? To try and shed some light on things and help you, the listener, make smarter decisions. Exactly. So as we wrap things up, is there one key takeaway that you want our listeners to remember? What's the one thing they should keep in mind as they try to navigate all of this?
Well, I think the most important thing is that this situation is always changing. The Bank of England has given us an idea of what they might do, but things could easily change. The market might be underestimating how quickly and drastically the bank might act, and that could have a big impact on everyone.
So it's not just about whether they'll cut rates, it's also about how fast they'll do it and by how much.
Exactly. And those factors could ripple out and affect all sorts of things, from house prices to how people invest their money. It's like a chain reaction, one move leads to another. But it's important to remember that nothing is set in stone. There are lots of things that could happen, and things can change quickly.
So we're talking about possibilities, not guarantees.
Right.
So what would you say to our listeners? How can they stay ahead of the game and make sure they're ready for whatever comes next?
Well, first of all, stay curious. Keep an eye on those economic indicators we talked about, like unemployment wages and inflation. Those are the things that will give you clues about what the Bank of England might do next. And don't just rely on headlines, dig a little deeper. Try to understand why these decisions are being made.
It's like being an economic detective, looking for those little clues that tell you what's really going on.
Precisely. And maybe most importantly, think about how these potential changes could create opportunities or risks for your own personal finances. Are you thinking about buying a house in the next year or two? Are you investing for retirement? The decisions the Bank of England makes could have a real impact on your goals. So take some time to consider how these changes might affect you personally and adjust your plans if you need to.
It's all about being proactive, taking control of your financial future instead of just reacting to whatever happens.
That's the idea. Knowledge is power. The more you understand about these economic forces, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions that work for you.
Well said. This has been a really insightful deep dive. Thanks so much for helping us navigate these choppy economic waters.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy exploring these topics, and I applaud our listeners for taking the time to stay informed.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to stay tuned for future deep dives as this story continues to unfold. The economic landscape is always changing. and we'll be here to help you navigate it every step of the way. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay ahead of the curve.